We take transportation these days for granted. Just think about the days where people had to ride horses to get to a destination, or even walk for miles. The automobile industry had a huge impact in Canada. Even though some of the earlier speed records were set by electrical cars, they did not stay in production past the first decade of the 20th century. They were getting too expensive and people wanted faster cars. Major companies like Ford and Chrysler expanded well into the 20s. Ford Company introduced the Model T in 1909. This was the first widely affordable car because of assembly lines. The early Canadian industry thrived because of the demands from the First Mechanized War. This allowed companies like Ford to build thousands of vehicles for the First World War. The automobile industry had grown in Canada by 1923. New models are always being redesigned and re-engineered. Key things the industry keeps improving on to respond to consumer demand is convenience, need for emissions reductions, greater fuel efficiency, recyclability, and increased safety. In making these major changes, investments by manufacturers in production facilities and equipment has increased greatly. In Canada, capital spending and investment commitments since 1990 has exceeded $24 billion. To this day, companies are trying to create energy-efficient cars to reduce emissions. Just imagine how capable a car would be in 100 years.
Entertainment immensely evolved throughout the 1920s with the advancement of technology, one of which, the radio, is a device that we still use today. Although the radio and the radio programs were around for the past 60 years, beginning in the 1920s, radio programming became a mainstream item and less of a novelty. At this time, many Canadian radio stations started to fill with cheap productions, such as comedies, drama, and music. As a result of these cheap productions, many people prefer to listen to the American radio stations, which caused a loss of profit and views in the Canadian side. This caused the Canadian Railway Network to decide to broadcast plays in 1925 in high-quality French and English, which drew the attention of everyone across Canada. Not long after, Canadians were broadcasting folk songs, children's stories, and many reports. The war also greatly affected the radio stations, as a lot of stations started to spread propaganda messages. Relating this to common days, little has changed, with many still listening to FM radio and hearing many propaganda messages.
While the art of refrigeration can be traced back to 1000 BC, it was only after the 1920s that a new form of refrigeration completely changed the lives of many Canadians. Before the 1920s, many households used an icebox to preserve their fruits and vegetables, as well as their meats. In order to operate, this cabinet-like appliance provided a daily source of natural ice that was delivered by an iceman. As the icebox was highly inefficient, it inspired the creation of a new technology called vapor compression to keep things cool. Originally invented in 1834 by Jacob Perkins, the refrigerator didn't become a part of Canadian life until 1927. During this period, an American company named General Electric designed the monitor top refrigerator, which was cooled by compressed toxic gases that were kept in a cylinder on top of the fridge. Due to growing consumerism caused by post-war industry, these new refrigerators were quickly adopted in many homes across Canada. While refrigeration was originally meant to preserve food, in the modern age of the 1920s, electro-refrigeration became an unhealthy convenience. This was mainly due to the creation of frozen foods in 1923 by Clarence Birdseye, whose company became popular for their frozen vegetables. The refrigerator completely changed the lives of many in the 1920s and continues to be a highly influential appliance today. It is responsible for many eating habits and decisions in today's postmodern Canada.
Airplanes have been around since the early 1900s. However, in the 1920s, many improvements have been done to make these vehicles more versatile. Airplanes were important in the 1920s because they became more versatile and improved the economy by providing a lot more jobs and caused more money circulation. During the 1920s, aircrafts were upgraded to become more flexible. Some of these newer practices included carrying heavier loads, delivering cargo and mail a lot quicker, carrying passengers, revealing undiscovered land, and broadcasting advertisements. In 1927, Pan American Airways made the first transatlantic passenger flights. In 1929, Commander Beard was able to discover many previously unknown features of Antarctica with his flights. In the late 1920s, Zeppelins were also used to broadcast advertisements. With all of these new abilities of an aircraft, there were more job opportunities available. People were needed to fly these additional aircrafts, load the cargo, and post the advertisements. On top of that, there are passengers that pay money for the ride. Some people did stunts on the plane as a hobby, others did it as an occupation. Some even paid to watch these stunts and air shows. People would also pay to get rides in airplanes or zeppelins just for fun. Airplanes were important in the 1920s because many new uses for aircrafts were discovered and it all contributed to the economy positively.
The evolution of telecommunication, hence the title. Alexander Graham Bell, inspired by the string bell, invented the first telephone in 1876. It was an improvement of the telegraph. How did telephones define the 1920s? Widely used in the 1920s, the candlestick design consisted of a stand attached to a handheld listening device. Yet it was soon replaced by a new handset design where it incorporated with a carriage which held in one speaking and listening device, the handset and the dial. This was significant because previously with the candlestick, people needed to contact an operator who would then connect the call. So this was also known as the POTS, which was plain old telephone service. But with the new telephone receiver, automated exchanges allowed for personalized numbers to be dialed from home and directly connected to the other side of the line. This advancement was made possible by improvements to the transmitters and telephone design.
The onset of the First World War in Europe brought unknown prosperity to Canadian farmers. Post-World War I, there was a depression, but around the early 1920s, farmers were starting to get back into business because of the demand for crops from Canada and other countries. In response to this, Canadian farmers increased output by purchasing more machinery. During this time, traditional methods of farming were still in place, such as the use of draft animals and the use of heavy plows. The new advancements of agricultural technologies were making a breakthrough. In many ways, the adoption of the tractor in the interwar period symbolizes the technological changes that occurred in the agricultural sector. The new tractors were gasoline-powered rather than the old steam-powered tractors, and this changeover in the power source had far-reaching consequences and altered the farmer's lifestyle. Also, the adoption of the tractor was more efficient, faster, and labor-saving. In 1922, International Harvester introduced a row crop tractor with small tricycle front wheels and with adjustable rear wheels. This way, tractors could plant, cultivate, and harvest row crops more efficiently. It also pioneered the power takeoff that allowed tools to operate at constant speeds independently of the speed at which the tractor was moving. In 1929, Alice Chalmers introduced a rubber tire tractor. Rubber tires with large raised cleats dug flexibly into the earth, giving better traction and pulling power and allowing it to travel on surface road. This was something that tractors with spade lug metal tires could not do. These improvements made the tractor one of the most useful technologies for a farmer, and this continues on forward to this day.
I get a feel when I hear them yelling, I'm singing watermelon, nobody know what but I love to hear them say.
Insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas that allows your body to use sugar from the carbohydrates in the food that you eat for energy or to store glucose for future use. Insulin helps to keep your blood sugar levels from getting too high or from getting too low. For the people with diabetes, the year 1921 was very important because that was the year when Canadian physician Frederick Banting and his medical student Charles H. Best discovered the hormone insulin in pancreatic extracts of dogs at the University of Toronto. On July 30th, 1921, they injected the hormone into a diabetic dog and found out that it effectively lowered the dog's blood glucose levels to normal. By the end of that year, with the help of Canadian chemist James B. Collett and Scottish psychologist J.J.R. McLeod, Banting and Best purified insulin. On January 11, 1922, it was used to treat Leonard Thompson, a 14-year-old boy suffering from severe diabetes at the Toronto General Hospital, which resulted in very little effect. Finally, the next year a patent was granted to Canada, and later on in October, insulin was commercially available to North America.
The significant economic growth after the Civil War and increasing use of urban land encouraged the development of taller buildings beginning in the 1870s in U.S. cities. Later, the boom of the 1920s helped shape the popular style of architecture called the Art Deco style that spread into Canada. This style first appeared in France and later spread internationally in the 20s. Art Deco consists of very geometric shapes. At the time, Art Deco represented luxury, glamour, and exuberance, and faith in social and technological progress. The popular materials used to build these tall structures were glass and steel, as well as iron, alloys, and reinforced concrete, like in the Chrysler Building. In Canada, the first skyscraper, which was 355 meters to the tip, is the first Canadian place by the architect Edward Gerald Stone.